Today, we're going to rank every one of those rifles, from the ones that practically handed soldiers a death sentence to the one that was so good, armies kept using it for another 50 years. 10. Mannlicher M1895. Let's start at the bottom, and I mean the very bottom. Picture a young Austro-Hungarian soldier in the freezing mud of Galicia, 1915. His hands are numb, his unit is under fire. He grabs his Mannlicher M1895, technically a straight-pull bolt action, which sounds clever. Pull back, push forward, done, no rotation. In theory, faster than anything else on this list. But here's where the Austro-Hungarian army made a mistake they'd be paying for in blood. That straight-pull mechanism, it was extraordinarily sensitive to dirt, mud, and cold, the very conditions that defined the Eastern Front. Men reported bolts jamming mid-cycle, rounds failing to extract, and worst of all, a fixed rotary magazine that you could not top off with loose rounds. You had to reload with an entire 5-round clip, or nothing. And that's before we even talk about the ammunition. The 8x50mm R cartridge it fired was a rimmed round in an era when everyone was moving to rimless. It made feeding unreliable and manufacturing a logistical nightmare. In the chaos of trench warfare, a rifle that jams when it's dirty isn't just a bad rifle. It's a gravestone. The Mannlicher M1895 sits at number 10. Interesting engineering, terrible timing, terrible battlefield reliability.
9. Berthier rifle. France. France went into World War I with confidence. They had élan, the spirit of the attack. What they did not have was a particularly good rifle. The Berthier came in several versions, the carbine for cavalry, the infantry version for the front lines, and on paper it looked decent. Bolt action, 8mm Lebel, reasonably accurate. But here's the problem. 3 rounds. That's all the original Berthier could hold. 3 rounds in an en-bloc clip, while every other major power was fielding rifles with 5, 8, or even 10 rounds. In the fire and movement chaos of the Western Front, a soldier running across no man's land with 3 bullets in his rifle was not in a good position. The French knew this. They scrambled to update it to a 5-round version mid-war, but that fix created its own feeding issues. To be fair, the Berthier was lighter than the Lebel it was partly replacing, and colonial troops and cavalry genuinely liked it for its handiness. But for the horrors of the Marne and Verdun, it was underpowered for the task.
8. Lebel Model 1886, France. Now here's a rifle that deserves respect and a proper burial. In 1886, the Lebel Model 1886 was the most advanced military rifle on Earth. It was the first military rifle anywhere in the world to use smokeless powder. That's not a footnote, that's a revolution. Every other army scrambled to catch up. But here's the cruel irony of military equipment. By 1914, 28 years later, it was obsolete, and the French were still issuing it by the millions because they simply hadn't replaced it fast enough. The Lebel's fatal flaw was its magazine, a tubular design under the barrel, holding 8 rounds but loaded 1 round at a time. In 1886, that was fine. By 1914, when German soldiers were running bolt actions that reloaded with 5-round stripper clips in under 3 seconds, the Lebel's slow reload was a liability. And it was heavy. Over 9 pounds unloaded. After carrying it through 20 miles of a route march plus kit, ammunition, and a full pack, that weight matters. The Lebel ranks at number 8, a legend that survived past its prime and made French soldiers pay the price for it.
Number 7. Carcano M91, Italy. Italy entered the war in 1915, and their soldiers were handed the Carcano M91. And honestly, it wasn't a terrible rifle. It just wasn't a great one either. The Carcano was a 6-shot bolt action using an en-bloc clip. You loaded all 6 rounds as a unit, which actually made reloading reasonably fast. The cartridge was a 6.5mm round,
unusually small by the standards of the day, but that had an advantage: lower recoil, meaning faster follow-up shots and less fatigue over a long day's fighting. So what's the problem? The Italian front was the Alps, the Isonzo River, mountains, stone, freezing altitude, and cave fighting. And in those conditions, the Carcano's relatively weak cartridge struggled at the longer ranges the terrain demanded. Mountain warfare is sniper warfare. You need power and range. The 6.5mm, for all its handling virtues, just didn't hit hard enough at distance. Add to that inconsistent quality control as Italian factories ramped up production in wartime, and you've got a rifle that was adequate at best and frustrating at worst.
6. Ross Rifle, Canada. Now, here's a story that should be a cautionary tale taught in every engineering school. The Ross rifle was a Canadian design, and it was genuinely one of the most accurate rifles in the world. Canadian snipers loved it. In competition shooting, it was almost unbeatable. Sir Charles Ross designed it to an exacting standard, and in peacetime trials, it outshot everything. Then, they put it in a trench. The Western Front wasn't a shooting range. It was mud, blood, sand, cordite residue, and 10,000 things that got inside a rifle and destroyed it. And the Ross rifle had one catastrophic flaw that no amount of peacetime accuracy could compensate for. Under sustained rapid fire, it overheated and jammed. Badly. Soldiers reported rounds that couldn't be extracted, bolts that seized, and worst of all, a design so precise that dirty or swollen British ammunition, which Canadian soldiers were often forced to use when their own ran out, simply wouldn't feed reliably. But the truly terrifying flaw: the bolt could be reassembled incorrectly after cleaning, and when fired in that state, it would blow straight backwards, into the shooter's face. Canadian troops in the trenches, under fire, were throwing away their Ross rifles and picking up Lee-Enfields from dead British soldiers. That tells you everything. 5. Springfield M1903, USA. America walked into this war in 1917 with one of the finest bolt-action rifles on the planet, the Springfield M1903. And yes, I said that carefully, because there's a catch. The Springfield was heavily influenced by, some would say copied from, the German Mauser 98. So much so that the US government ended up paying Mauser royalties on the design. That's how blatant it was. But here's the thing. If you're going to borrow from the best. The M1903 was beautifully made, accurate to ranges that impressed even experienced marksmen. The .30-06 cartridge it fired was powerful, flat-shooting, and became the standard American military round for decades. The action was smooth, reliable, and could be stripped and cleaned in field conditions without drama. The problem was purely logistical. When America entered the war, it had roughly 600,000 of them. It needed millions of rifles immediately. The factories couldn't keep up. That's why the U.S. ended up issuing the Enfield Pattern 1917 in huge numbers. We'll get to that in a moment. But for the soldiers who had one, the Springfield M1903 was exceptional. It's number 5, a rifle that earned its reputation. It just arrived too late and in too few numbers to change history on its own. 4. Gewehr 98, Germany. This is the rifle that defined what a bolt action should feel like. The Gewehr 98. Designed by Paul Mauser, adopted by the German Army in 1898, and by 1914, it was simply the most refined bolt-action mechanism in existence. In the hands of a trained German infantryman, and German soldiers were very well trained in 1914, the Gewehr 98 was a formidable weapon. At Mons and Le Cateau in August 1914, British soldiers reported German rifle fire so rapid and accurate they initially thought they were facing machine guns. They weren't. They were facing well-drilled men with Gewehr 98s. So why is it number 4 and not higher? 2 reasons. The first is ergonomics, At nearly 4.1 feet long, it was unwieldy in trench fighting, where you needed a rifle you could turn around in a confined space. The second is the bolt handle. It was straight, meaning it sat high and caught on equipment when crawling through wire or debris. The Germans actually developed a shorter carbine version, the Car 98A, mid-war to address exactly this. 3. Pattern 1914/M1917 Enfield, Britain, USA. This rifle doesn't get the fame it deserves, and that's a genuine injustice. The Pattern 1914 started life before the war as a British project to replace the Lee-Enfield with something more accurate at long range. It had a stronger Mauser-style action, a longer sight radius, and aperture sights that were demonstrably better for precision shooting than the Lee-Enfield's open sights. Then, the war started. Mass production of a brand new design wasn't feasible, so the Lee-Enfield stayed as the primary British rifle. The P-14 went to snipers and second-line troops, and those snipers were thrilled. The accuracy was exceptional. When America entered the war, they looked at their production problem, not enough Springfields, and found a solution. British factories already tooled to make the P-14 were rechambered to take the American .30-06 cartridge, and the result was the M1917 Enfield. By the time the armistice came, more than 75% of American soldiers in France were actually carrying M1917s, not the Springfield M1903. Think about that. The rifle that most American doughboys carried into the trenches was a modified British design that had originally been rejected as a replacement. It was stronger than the Mauser action, more accurate at range than a Lee-Enfield, comfortable, reliable. If this rifle had been introduced 5 years earlier, it might have sat at the very top of this list.
2. Mosin-Nagant M1891, Russia. If the Gewehr 98 was a Swiss watch, the Mosin-Nagant was a sledgehammer, and in the killing fields of the Eastern Front, you wanted the sledgehammer. Russia went to war in 1914 with the Mosin-Nagant M1891, and this rifle is proof that sometimes engineering that's just good enough but absolutely refuses to break beats engineering that's brilliant but fragile. The Mosin-Nagant was not elegant. The bolt knob was a smooth, round ball that became nearly impossible to operate with frozen fingers, so Russian soldiers wrapped wire around it to get grip. The magazine fed from an internal box loaded by stripper clips, but the clips weren't always available, so soldiers learned to thumb-load individual rounds. There was a separate magazine cutoff for loading single rounds and saving the magazine, which added complexity most soldiers ignored. None of it mattered, because what the Mosin-Nagant did was this. It fired. In -40°C on the Galician plains, in mud, caked in dirt, with ice in the action, it fired. The 7.62 by 54mm R cartridge it used, still in production and still used in Russian military sniper rifles today, hit hard and hit far. The rifle was robust to a degree that bordered on indestructible. Over 37 million were produced during the rifle's lifetime. In WW1, Russia produced them by the millions and still didn't have enough. They imported extra from the United States. Finnish, Soviet, and Russian military snipers used it through WW2 and beyond. The legendary Simo Häyhä, the deadliest sniper in recorded history, used a Mosin-Nagant to score over 500 confirmed kills in the Winter War.
1. Best Lee-Enfield SMLE Mark III, Britain. There's no serious debate here. The short magazine Lee-Enfield Mark III, the SMLE. And if you want to understand why it sits at the top of this list, you need to understand what the British Army asked of its infantry in 1914. The doctrine was called Rapid Independent Fire. British soldiers were trained, drilled obsessively, to fire 15 aimed rounds per minute, not sprayed, not panicked, aimed. 15 rounds per minute from a bolt-action rifle. The Mauser-trained German army thought this was impossible, that it had to be machine guns. At the Battle of Mons and at the retreat, small numbers of British infantrymen created fields of fire that stopped German advances cold. It was not machine guns. It was the Lee-Enfield and the men who knew how to use it. Here's what made the SMLE so remarkable. First,
the magazine, 10 rounds, double what the Mauser held, double what the Springfield. In a firefight where every second counts, having 10 rounds before your first reload is a profound tactical advantage. Second, the bolt. Every other military bolt action in this war had the locking lugs at the front of the bolt. The Lee-Enfield had them at the rear. That meant a smaller, faster motion to cycle the action. An experienced British soldier could cycle, aim, and fire so quickly that the technique was given a name, the Mad Minute. It was the rifle that gave soldiers every possible advantage: fast, reliable, high capacity, battle-proven, and, in the hands of men who knew it, genuinely lethal at a rate that shocked the world.
If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like this one too. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Our channel is small, so we are replying every comment below. Comment any suggestion for future videos. Thanks for watching.